Okay, let's go. Number 10. The bladder alarm system and the supreme power of biological necessity. Imagine that you are stranded on a deserted island or trapped in a desperate situation deep in the wilderness. You need to wake up extremely early to hunt for food or prepare for a long journey the moment the sun begins to rise. But you have no clock, no phone, and no device of any kind to help you. This is when you activate one of the ultimate time management tricks our ancestors used for thousands of years to survive in a dangerous world. The human body already possesses an incredibly sensitive biological alarm clock, and it is located inside your bladder. When you drink an unusually large amount of water just before going to sleep, pressure inside your bladder begins to build. After roughly 5 or 6 hours, it may reach a point that your brain can no longer ignore. Your body sends an urgent signal through the nervous system and forces you to wake up immediately, unless you want to face a wet and deeply embarrassing disaster in your bed. It is a remarkably effective way to manage time because it has no snooze button and no option to turn off the alarm, unlike the smartphones we use today. You have no choice but to wake up, get moving, and begin your day. The physical pressure simply will not allow you to remain in bed for another second. Ancient warriors were said to use methods like this to make sure they woke around dawn, the time when surprise attacks from the enemy were most likely to occur. It transformed one of the most basic and instinctive human needs into a surprisingly reliable time management tool. You are directly manipulating your own biological processes to create a wake-up sequence that cannot be delayed by laziness or a lack of willpower. And that could help you stay one step ahead of everyone else in the daily race for survival and labor. Number 9. Professional knocker-uppers and the legendary pea shooters of Britain. During the 19th century, in the crowded, smoke-filled industrial cities of England and Ireland, there was a profession that sounds extremely strange and almost impossible to believe today. Yet it helped keep an enormous economy running on schedule. It was the profession of the knocker-upper. At the time, reliable alarm clocks were still unfamiliar, expensive, and beyond the reach of many ordinary workers. Factory laborers needed someone to guarantee that they would not arrive late for work. Being late could result in a heavy fine or immediate dismissal. Knocker-uppers were often elderly people or women trying to earn additional income during the difficult years of the Industrial Revolution. They carried long bamboo poles and repeatedly tapped on the upstairs windows of their customers. They would continue knocking until the person inside appeared at the window and confirmed that they were fully awake and ready for another exhausting workday that might last more than 10 hours. Some knocker-uppers became even more creative and professional. They used long blowpipes to shoot dried peas accurately against bedroom windows, producing an irritating tapping sound that the sleeping brain found difficult to ignore. It forced the customer to wake up and begin preparing for work. Imagine waking before sunrise while the streets were still dark, cold, and buried in fog, because someone was standing below your window firing peas at the glass until you finally lost your patience and got out of bed. This was a human-powered alarm service in the most literal sense, and it worked remarkably well. It helped tens of thousands of laborers arrive on time at textile mills, workshops, and enormous industrial factories. These workers formed a living time management system that kept the rhythm of an entire city stable and precise without the need for any advanced automation. Number 8. Candle clocks and the terrifying crash of metal in a dark room. You may think the default alarm sound on your phone is the worst thing you could possibly hear in the morning, but that probably means you have never heard of the candle alarm clocks used in the past. In an age when mechanical clocks were luxuries reserved for the extremely wealthy and the aristocracy, ordinary workers had to use the power of fire and metal to manage their precious time as strictly as possible. They took long candles and carefully marked time intervals along their sides, based on the relatively steady rate at which the wax burned in a quiet environment. To transform the candle into an alarm that could not be ignored, they inserted sharp metal nails into the wax at the exact point corresponding to the time they wanted to wake up the following morning. Below the candle, they placed a thick brass or iron tray. The tray caught the melting wax, but it also served another purpose. It created the alarm. When the flame finally reached the marked point, the surrounding wax melted away. The nail lost its support and dropped directly onto the metal tray below. The impact created a loud metallic clang that echoed throughout the silent room in the middle of the night. Imagine sleeping deeply in total darkness when a violent metal crash suddenly explodes beside you. It would sound like a small detonation, instantly sending your heart racing. That was how people made sure they did not oversleep. They needed to wake up before sunrise to work in the fields, tend crops, or begin their duties in a workshop, taking advantage of every available minute of daylight. The brilliance of the system was its simplicity. A candle burned at a relatively consistent rate. It did not run out of batteries or suffer a sudden software failure like the electronic devices we depend on today. However, the method also had one terrifying weakness. If you accidentally knocked over the candle while sleeping, you might not merely oversleep. Your entire home could be reduced to a pile of ashes before sunrise. Number 7. Professional readers and the early audiobook system of cigar factories. During the 19th century, large cigar factories in Cuba and parts of the southern United States developed a fascinating way to improve morale, make better use of time, and maintain productivity. Few people today know much about it. Workers inside these factories had to perform the same repetitive tasks thousands of times. From morning until evening, they rolled cigars by hand. The work was monotonous, mentally exhausting, and extremely likely to make people sleepy. Repeating the same motion for hours could drain the mind and cause productivity to decline. So the workers voluntarily contributed a portion of their hard-earned wages to hire a special person known as a lector, a professional reader. The lector sat on a raised platform in the center of the factory. Using a clear and expressive voice, he read newspapers, political commentary, and famous novels aloud while the rest of the factory continued working. It was one of the earliest and most vivid versions of the audiobooks and podcasts people now listen to on their phones while completing routine tasks. Listening to stories and current events helped the workers remain alert. It also allowed them to work with a steadier rhythm as the unfolding narrative made the hours feel as though they were passing more quickly. Many workers who could not read or write became surprisingly knowledgeable about politics, literature, and society because they listened to books every day while their hands remained busy. Factory owners initially hated the practice. They feared that the workers would become distracted and damage expensive products. But many eventually had to acknowledge that productivity could improve when the workers were mentally engaged. This system transformed some of the dullest hours of physical labor into valuable hours of education. It allowed people to feed their minds while their hands continued working, making use of the same stretch of time for two entirely different purposes. Number 6. The stimulant revolution and the collective awakening of an entire continent. Before the 17th century, some of the most common everyday drinks across Europe were not always clean water, but weak beer and diluted wine. Natural water sources could be polluted and contaminated with dangerous pathogens, especially in crowded settlements. This has led to the popular image of an entire continent spending centuries in a constant state of mild intoxication from morning until night, and you certainly cannot conduct careful scientific experiments or manage a serious business efficiently when your mind is constantly sluggish and clouded by alcohol. Then, tea and coffee began arriving in Europe in increasing quantities, and everything started to change. Society began shifting away from beverages associated with relaxation and intoxication toward drinks containing natural stimulants. Caffeine increased alertness, sharpened concentration, and allowed people to remain mentally active for longer periods. Coffee houses began appearing across major cities to satisfy the growing demand among intellectuals, merchants, professionals, and workers. They were not merely places to buy a drink. They became some of the most energetic centers of information exchange, business, debate, and creativity of their age. People could sit for hours discussing politics, conducting business, studying science, or developing new ideas with minds sharpened by coffee. It was a major turning point in the history of work. Stimulant drinks allowed people to remain active for longer, concentrate more intensely, and organize their time with greater discipline. This helped create the conditions for extraordinary social and intellectual developments. Music. However, artificial alertness came at a price. Human beings began developing the habit of borrowing energy from the future in order to spend it in the present. We forced the brain to continue working at times when it should have been resting and recovering. We began maintaining a pace of life faster than the one nature originally designed for us. And that may have contributed to forms of mental pressure our ancestors rarely experienced in the same way. Number 5. The oil lamp deadline and the crushing pressure of approaching darkness. In today's digital world, a deadline is often nothing more than a number displayed on a computer or phone screen. It feels abstract, and sometimes it feels negotiable. But for scholars and skilled craftspeople in the past, a deadline could be a real quantity of liquid, something visible, physical, and disappearing before their eyes with every passing minute. Some people used oil lamps with carefully measured markings to control the length of their evening work sessions. When they sat down to work, they poured a specific amount of oil into the lamp. That amount represented the time they had given themselves to complete the task. They made a firm commitment. The page had to be written, or the object had to be completed, before the final drop of oil was consumed and the flame disappeared. This created tremendous psychological pressure. When the flame went out, darkness immediately swallowed the room. There was no button that could extend the deadline. There was no application where you could change the schedule, and no message you could send asking for more time. Either you finished before the oil ran out, or you were forced to stop in frustration and defeat because you could no longer see well enough to continue. This method encouraged an intense state of concentration. You could literally watch your remaining time disappear as the flame consumed the oil. When the fire began to weaken, the rising tension could make your hands move faster and force your brain to work at maximum capacity. You had to reach the finish line before darkness won. It demonstrates how productive human beings can become when a real and physical consequence is approaching directly in front of them. Time was no longer an invisible idea. It had become something tangible, and every moment of light had to be respected because once it was wasted, it could not be recovered. Number 4. The midday rest and the intelligent energy strategy of hot climates. In regions with intensely hot climates, attempting to work during the middle of the day is not merely inefficient. It can become an unnecessary form of physical punishment beneath the burning heat of the overhead sun. Communities in these environments develop the tradition of taking an extended midday break to preserve their strength for the cooler and more productive hours of the late afternoon and evening. In some places, people stopped working from approximately 1 in the afternoon until 4. They slept or rested inside cooler homes, allowing their bodies to recover. During these hours, the streets could become so silent that the entire settlement appeared abandoned. The practice helped people avoid the most dangerous heat and the decline in mental and physical performance caused by high temperatures. Once their bodies had cooled down and recovered, they began a second period of work. They could continue with renewed energy into the evening or even late at night, when the air had become far more comfortable. This was time management through energy exchange. People sacrificed the least productive hours beneath the burning sun and replaced them with hours when they were alert, focused, and physically capable of producing better results. In the modern global economy, however, this tradition is being threatened by rigid administrative schedules that run continuously from morning until evening, with little respect for local geography or climate. People living in hot regions may lose their valuable period of recovery while still being forced to battle extreme heat in order to complete their work. A midday rest is not simply an act of laziness. It is an intelligent method of managing the body's limited resources. It helps protect the long-term performance of both the brain and the muscles. And it may be something we need to learn again if we want to work sustainably. Resting at the right time does not mean refusing to work. It means preparing the body for a stronger and more productive effort when the conditions are right. Number 3. Segmented sleep and the lost secret of midnight alertness. Have you ever wondered why your brain sometimes feels strangely awake at 2 in the morning, even though you went to bed early? One possible explanation is that human sleep may not always have followed the rigid 8-hour pattern that industrial society expects from us today. Before electric lighting transformed the night and disrupted natural rhythms, many people reportedly followed a more flexible pattern known as segmented sleep. The first period of sleep began soon after darkness fell. It allowed the body to recover physically after a long day of labor in the fields, the home, or the workshop. Then, around midnight, people might naturally wake for 1 or 2 hours. During this quiet interval, they could pray, think, read, study, perform household tasks, or simply have deep conversations with their families. Some writers, scholars, and craftspeople may have used these silent hours to work on ideas while the world around them remained asleep and there were almost no distractions. After making use of this calm and mentally clear period, they returned to bed for a second sleep that continued until dawn. Then they began the new day feeling restored. This pattern offered a different way of organizing the body's natural rhythm. Rather than demanding one uninterrupted period of sleep, it divided the night into stages of rest and wakefulness. The modern expectation that everyone must sleep for one continuous block may not perfectly match the natural tendencies of every individual. For some people, waking briefly during the night may not necessarily mean that something is wrong. The quiet interval between 2 periods of sleep could offer unusual concentration and creativity. It could allow people to approach difficult intellectual tasks without the noise, obligations, and constant interruptions of the daytime world. Number 2. The rhythm of the seasons and maximum flexibility in long-term labor. Our ancestors were not always chained to the rigid formula of 8 hours a day and 5 days a week in the mechanical way many modern workers are today. Their approach to time was often more flexible. It was shaped by the growth cycle of crops, the weather, the seasons, and the changing amount of natural daylight. During the summer, when the days were long and the sunlight was abundant, farmers and builders might work extraordinarily long hours. Some could labor for as many as 16 hours in a single day while planting, harvesting, repairing, or completing essential seasonal work. They made use of every available minute of daylight because they understood that the opportunity would not return until the following year. The weather was favorable, the days were long, and the work had to be completed while the conditions allowed it. Winter was different. When snow covered the ground and daylight disappeared quickly, many people spent more time resting indoors and performing lighter tasks needed to maintain the household. They did not necessarily force their bodies to operate at maximum intensity every day of the year like machines in a modern factory. Their workload expanded and contracted with the seasons. This flexibility gave the body periods of intense effort, followed by longer periods of recovery. Rather than demanding identical productivity in every month, people adapted to the environmental conditions that directly affected what work was possible. They lived according to the rhythms of nature and the biological changes associated with the seasons. Modern society, by contrast, often expects people to maintain exactly the same speed and intensity throughout the year. It does not matter whether it is summer or winter. Artificial lighting allows the schedule to remain unchanged. But the human mind and body do not always respond to every season in exactly the same way. Rigid work plans may therefore represent a serious mistake in the management of human energy. They ignore environmental factors that can directly influence an individual's real capacity for attention, endurance, and productivity. Number 1. When human beings became living sundials. The most sophisticated form of time management achieved by people in the past may have been their ability to connect deeply with the enormous natural rhythms surrounding them. They did not always need machines to tell them the time. They did not need to look at a lifeless device on their wrist to know how much daylight remained, or when a difficult day of work was nearing its end. They could examine the length and angle of their own shadows on the ground and estimate the time with remarkable accuracy. This knowledge was built through generations of living in close contact with the natural world. They observed the positions of constellations in the night sky to determine which season was approaching and what preparations the community needed to make for long-term survival. They could notice subtle changes in humidity and wind direction to predict when rain was likely to arrive. That knowledge told them when to stop working, protect their tools, move animals, secure crops, or find shelter. Their bodies and natural senses became extraordinarily sensitive instruments for measuring time, space, weather, and seasonal change. No modern machine can completely replace the subtle awareness created by a lifetime of direct observation. This connection helped them understand when to concentrate all their strength on a task, and when to stop before exhaustion destroyed their ability to face the next challenge. Modern people, however, often spend their days trapped inside lifeless concrete structures beneath artificial lights. Slowly, we lose our direct awareness of the vast and living world outside. We have surrendered much of our instinctive sense of time. Now, we depend almost completely on electronic devices to tell us where we are in the endless flow of the day. We imagine that modern tools have allowed us to control time. But in reality, time often seems to have chained us to an endless race, pulling us forward until we are mentally exhausted and spiritually empty. Returning to nature and listening more carefully to the signals of our own bodies may be one of the few ways to recover balance and regain control over our lives in a world filled with pressure. Always remember this: time is not merely a collection of lifeless numbers displayed on a phone screen. It is the rhythm of your own heartbeat as you move through this enormous world, and the way you choose to use it is the only script you truly have the power to write for your own life. That is all for today. In the near future, I will continue creating videos like this about fascinating and meaningful subjects involving human life, history, and the mysteries of our species. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next episodes, filled with surprising stories and new knowledge. Goodbye for now. And I hope you remain productive, alert, and deeply connected to yourself as you move through the relentless current of life.